Every day after school, the boy walked past the music hall, his eyes drawn to the grand piano sitting in the corner like a treasure waiting to be discovered. He had seen it many times before, but today it seemed to call to him louder than ever. The polished wood reflected the soft light from the windows, and the keys shone white and black, perfectly arranged, waiting for someone to bring them to life. He could hear the faint echoes of music that had been played there, and each note seemed to whisper stories of joy, sadness, and hope. He stood at the edge of the room, his heart beating fast, and imagined his fingers moving across those keys, creating melodies that could make people feel something deep inside. He had never played an instrument before. In fact, he had barely touched one. But there was something about the piano that felt like home. He didn't know how to explain it, but it was as if the piano understood him, as if it had been waiting for him to come along and tell his story through music. He could picture the way the notes would flow from his hands, first clumsy and uncertain, then slowly forming something beautiful. The thought made him smile and gave him hope. Every day he returned to watch the pianist who came to the hall. The pianist's hands moved gracefully over the keys, fingers flying with a confidence and ease that seemed almost magical. The boy studied every movement, every pause, every subtle touch of the keys. He tried to memorize the positions of the fingers, the rhythm of the hands, and the way the music seemed to rise and fall like waves on a gentle sea. He would go home and imagine playing the same pieces, repeating the movements in his mind over and over, feeling the music as if it were already a part of him. One afternoon, after weeks of just watching and dreaming, the boy could no longer hold back. He walked up to the teacher, his small hands fidgeting nervously in front of him. His voice trembled as he asked, "Please, may I try the piano? Just for a little while." The teacher looked down at him with kind eyes but shook their head gently. "Not yet," the teacher said softly. "You need more practice watching and learning before you can touch it." The boy's heart sank. He had hoped for a yes, even a small one, but all he received was a gentle refusal. He nodded silently, trying to hide the disappointment, but inside he felt a spark of determination ignite. He would not give up. If he could not touch the piano today, he would find a way to be ready for tomorrow. He promised himself that one day, his fingers would move across those keys and create something so beautiful that even the teacher would be amazed. Every day after that, he returned to the music hall, standing quietly in the corner while the pianist played. He paid attention to every detail, the way the pianist's fingers curved over the keys, the subtle changes in pressure that made the notes soft or loud, the pauses that added emotion to the music. He noticed the way the pianist's eyes closed sometimes, as if listening to the music from inside, and the way the body swayed gently with each movement. The boy tried to imagine himself in that place, feeling the music not just with his ears but with his whole body. At home, he found an old, out-of-tune keyboard that had been sitting in the corner for years. It was small and clunky, and the notes often sounded off, but it was better than nothing. He would spend hours pressing the keys, trying to remember the shapes of the chords he had seen the pianist play. At first, it sounded like a mess of random sounds, clashing and awkward, but he did not give up. Each day he tried again, repeating the movements he had memorized, imagining the music as it should be. Slowly, very slowly, some of the notes began to sound right, some of the chords started to feel familiar. His family noticed his obsession. They were proud of his dedication, but they worried that he might be wasting his time. "Why don't you do something easier?" they asked sometimes. "Why not try a sport or a game where you can win quickly?" But the boy could not explain why the piano mattered so much. It was not about winning or losing. It was about feeling something, about expressing a part of himself that words could not reach. Every note he imagined, every chord he practiced, made him feel alive in a way nothing else could. The boy also learned to be patient. Watching the pianist taught him that music was not just about speed or skill. It was about emotion, timing, and connection. He learned to wait for the right moment to press a key, to listen carefully to the sound, and to imagine the story behind each note. He discovered that even a simple melody could be powerful if it was played with feeling. This understanding gave him hope that one day, Even his own simple playing could touch hearts. Despite being denied, he never stopped dreaming. Each day at the hall, he imagined the moment when the teacher would finally say yes, when he could sit at the grand piano and let his fingers tell their story. He pictured the first hesitant notes, the surprise and delight of the teacher and the people who would listen, and the feeling of music flowing through him like a river. That image became a part of him, guiding him, giving him courage to keep learning and practicing, even when it was hard. Some days he would sit outside the music hall after school, closing his eyes and pretending the sounds of the piano were coming from his own hands. He would hum along softly, imagining the harmony, the rising and falling melody, the way the music could make people feel joy, sorrow, or hope. In those moments, he felt connected to something bigger than himself. It was not just about touching the piano anymore. It was about becoming part of the music, about telling a story that everyone could understand without words. The more he practiced, the more he noticed little things about himself. He realized he could concentrate for long periods, remembering the shapes of the keys and the sequences of notes. He noticed his fingers growing more nimble, even on the old stubborn keyboard at home. He learned to be patient with mistakes, understanding that each wrong note was just a step toward getting better. Slowly, he began to believe that he could really play, that the music he imagined in his mind could become real if he kept trying. His longing for the piano became a quiet but powerful part of his life. Every morning, he woke up thinking about the keys, every afternoon he returned to watch, and every evening he practiced alone at home. He did not know when the moment would come when he could finally play, but he knew he had to be ready when it did. That waiting made him stronger, more focused, and more determined than he had ever been. One rainy afternoon, he stood at the doorway of the music hall, watching the raindrops slide down the glass. The hall was empty, silent except for the faint echo of his footsteps. He pressed his hands together and whispered to himself, "Someday, I will play. Someday, they will hear me." That promise, spoken softly in the quiet of the hall, felt like a secret pact with the piano itself. He did not know how long it would take, but he knew that he could not give up. The piano had called to him, and he would answer no matter how long it took. Even though he had been denied, even though the keys had not yet felt his touch, he felt a connection that went beyond words. The piano was not just an instrument. It was a part of his dream, a part of who he was becoming. And every day, as he watched, imagined, and practiced, he felt that one day, that connection would become real, and the world would hear the music that had been growing inside him all along. Every day after school, the boy returned to the music hall, standing quietly in the corner while others played. He had learned that watching was as important as touching the keys. The pianist's hands moved with ease, fingers gliding over the black and white notes, creating music that made the room feel alive. He studied every detail, the slight bend of the fingers, the gentle pressure on some keys, the way the pianist's eyes closed to feel the music. Each small movement held meaning, and the boy tried to memorize them all, imagining himself playing the same way someday. At home, the boy's old, worn keyboard became his secret world. It was not perfect. Some keys were sticky, and others barely made a sound. But he treated it like the most precious treasure he had. He would practice for hours trying to replicate what he had observed. At first it was messy and confusing, a jumble of sounds that did not make sense. Some notes clashed, some chords felt wrong, but he refused to stop. Slowly, patterns began to form. He started recognizing sequences, remembering the melodies he had seen in the hall, and his fingers moved a little faster, a little more confidently. Sometimes, frustration would take over. He would press the keys again and again, and the notes would not come out right. He felt his small hands aching, his fingers stiff and sore. But each mistake taught him something. He learned patience, understanding that no one could become great without first learning to fail. He realized that mistakes were not the end but a step toward improvement. Even when the music did not sound beautiful, he felt progress inside himself, and that feeling was stronger than anything else. The boy's family noticed his obsession with the piano. Some were proud, while others were worried he was spending too much time chasing a dream that seemed far away. "Why don't you focus on something more practical?" one of them asked gently. "Why not play a game, or do something where you can see immediate results?" But the boy could not explain why the piano mattered so much. It was not about winning or losing, but about feeling something deep inside, about connecting with a part of himself he could not express with words. Every time he pressed the keys, even clumsily, he felt alive. He also began noticing the music in everyday life. The way the wind rustled the leaves outside, the rhythm of rain falling on the roof, the soft hum of people walking in the streets. All of it became part of his learning. He tried to turn these sounds into music on his keyboard, experimenting with rhythms, trying different key combinations, and imagining the melodies as if the piano was speaking back to him. He realized that music was not just notes on a page but feelings, emotions, and stories that needed to be told. As weeks passed, the boy became more confident. Watching the pianist had taught him the importance of emotion in music. It was not enough to play the correct notes. One had to feel them. He practiced slowly, carefully listening to every sound he made, trying to make the music flow naturally. Sometimes he would sit for hours, playing the same few notes over and over until they felt right. And each time, he felt a little closer to the sound he had imagined in his heart. The boy also began teaching himself new techniques. He would watch videos online, read books about music, and experiment with different ways of pressing the keys. He discovered that even simple adjustments in posture or hand position could change the tone completely. He became aware of how much detail mattered and how much patience was required to bring music to life. The process was slow, but he loved every step, knowing that every small improvement would make his dream closer to reality. Despite all his effort, the boy still longed for the day when he could touch the grand piano in the hall. Each time he watched others play, he imagined his own fingers dancing across the keys, creating melodies that could move people. The thought kept him motivated, pushing him to practice harder, even when he was tired or frustrated. He knew that his time would come, and he wanted to be ready when it did. He also learned the power of observation and memory. Watching the pianist, he realized that playing music was not just about fingers on keys. It was about understanding the story behind the notes. He would study the pianist's expressions, the way the body moved, the pauses, and the changes in tempo. He practiced replicating these in his mind, imagining the music as if it were flowing through him. Even without touching the grand piano, he felt a connection, as if he was already part of the music in some way. Some days, the boy would get discouraged. He would think about how much time he had spent practicing and how far away he still seemed from playing beautifully. But then he would remember the small successes, the notes that finally sounded right, the chord that matched what he had seen, the melody that felt complete for the first time. These moments reminded him that progress was real, even if it was slow, and that persistence would eventually pay off. The boy's friends noticed his focus, and some tried to distract him, inviting him to play or go somewhere else. But he would politely decline, explaining that he had something important to practice. It was not always easy. Sometimes he felt lonely, longing for someone to share his passion. Yet, he understood that dedication required sacrifice, and he embraced it because he believed in the dream he was building. He also began to understand the importance of listening. Sometimes he would close his eyes and imagine the hall filled with people listening to his music. He would feel the emotions the audience might experience, the joy, the sadness, the hope. Even though it was only in his mind, the practice made him more aware of how music could affect people. He realized that playing well was not just about technique but about touching hearts and telling a story without words. With every day, the boy's confidence grew. His hands became more agile, his fingers more precise, and his ears more sensitive to sound. He started experimenting with composing his own melodies, simple at first, but gradually more complex. He found joy in creating something new, a reflection of himself, and it motivated him to continue practicing. The piano, even at a distance, had become a part of his life, guiding him, inspiring him, and giving him hope. The boy also learned resilience. Each rejection, each moment of self-doubt, became fuel for his determination. He realized that being denied access to the piano was not the end but a challenge to prepare himself for the moment when he would finally play. This mindset changed everything. He no longer saw obstacles as barriers but as opportunities to grow stronger, smarter, and more skilled. Sometimes he would walk past the music hall, imagining the day when the teacher would finally say yes. He pictured the first time he would sit at the grand piano, feeling the keys beneath his fingers, and creating melodies that would make people smile, cry, or feel wonder. That vision became a part of him, something he could hold on to when practice was hard or progress seemed slow. It was a reminder that dreams, no matter how distant, were worth fighting for. The boy's world became filled with music, not just the sound of keys, but the rhythm of life itself. He began noticing patterns in nature, in conversations, in everyday movements, and he tried to translate them into sound. Each discovery, each experiment, made him more confident that music was not only a skill but a language that anyone could learn if they paid attention and listened closely. He never lost hope. Even on days when he felt tired, frustrated, or unsure, he returned to his keyboard and to the hall, practicing, observing, and imagining. He understood that mastery was not instant and that patience and persistence were as important as talent. And with each passing day, he felt a little closer to the moment when his fingers would finally touch the grand piano, and his long-held dream would begin to unfold in reality. One quiet afternoon, the boy returned to the music hall as usual, carrying the old keyboard under his arm. The room was empty except for the grand piano that stood like a silent guardian in the corner. He looked at it and felt a mix of longing and excitement. Today, something inside him felt different. He had practiced tirelessly, learned every detail, and imagined this moment countless times. He wanted, more than anything, to finally touch it, to see if the melodies he had imagined could come alive. He took a deep breath and approached the teacher, who was organizing music sheets on a nearby stand. The boy's voice was steady this time, carrying a quiet determination. "Please," he said, "may I try the piano? I have been practicing and learning. I promise I will do my best." The teacher looked at him carefully, noticing the intensity in his eyes, the way his hands were steady, and the way he spoke with respect and focus. For a moment, there was silence, and the boy held his breath, feeling both hope and fear. Finally, the teacher nodded slowly. "All right," the teacher said, voice calm but approving. "You may sit. But remember, this is not just about playing notes. Feel the music, listen to it, and let it guide your hands." The boy's heart leaped with joy. He could hardly believe it, but here it was, the moment he had waited for so long. He walked over to the piano, his hands hovering over the keys, unsure at first. The polished surface reflected his anxious but excited expression. He pressed down gently, and a soft note filled the empty hall. It was simple, almost hesitant, but it was his first note on the grand piano, and it felt like a miracle. He tried another note, then another, gradually forming a small melody. It was not perfect, far from it, but the sound was alive, and he felt connected to it in a way he had never felt before. The teacher watched silently, a quiet smile on their face. They could see the boy's focus, the way he listened to every sound, the way his fingers adjusted with care. Slowly, he began to play more confidently, pressing the keys with a sense of rhythm and emotion. Each note was a small victory, a proof of all the hours he had spent practicing, imagining, and learning. He felt as though the piano itself was responding to him, encouraging him to keep going, to explore more sounds and emotions. At first, the melody was simple, hesitant, and uneven, but as the boy played, he began to feel more comfortable. The notes flowed a little more smoothly, the rhythm became steadier, and the music started to take shape. He remembered everything he had observed, the way the pianist curved the fingers, the pauses, the changes in pressure, and tried to apply it to his playing. It was not easy. Some keys felt unfamiliar under his fingers, and some chords did not sound right. But he kept going, listening carefully, adjusting, and learning from each sound. With every note, he felt a deeper connection to the music. The melodies he had imagined in his mind began to take physical form, rising from the keys into the quiet hall. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the sound guide him. He could feel the rhythm, the emotion, the the flow of the music moving through his hands and into the room. It was as if the piano had been waiting for him, and now it was finally alive in his touch. Time seemed to disappear. The boy's fingers danced over the keys, sometimes hesitantly, sometimes confidently, forming melodies that surprised even him. He realized that the hours of practice, the mistakes, the memorizing, and the imagining had prepared him for this moment. The teacher watched quietly, amazed at how the boy's dedication had transformed into real music. It was not perfect yet, but it had a beauty and emotion that could not be taught. He played for a long time, losing himself in the music. He experimented with different rhythms and combinations of notes, creating simple melodies that carried feelings of joy, wonder, and sometimes sadness. Each sound was a small story, a reflection of the hours he had spent learning and imagining. He began to feel a new kind of confidence, realizing that the music was not just in the keys, but in the way he expressed it, in the emotions he could convey through sound. The teacher finally spoke softly, not to interrupt but to guide. Feel the pauses, listen to the silence as much as the notes. Music is not just the sound, but the space between it. The boy nodded, understanding immediately. He tried again, playing more slowly, letting each note breathe, letting the melody rise and fall naturally. The music became richer, more expressive, and he felt a deep satisfaction, knowing that he was beginning to understand what music truly meant. Other people passing by the hall paused to listen. They were drawn in by the sound, the emotion, and the sincerity of the boy's playing. Some stood silently, amazed that such beauty could come from such a young and untrained musician. The boy, focused on the music, did not notice them at first. He was too absorbed in the feeling, the connection between his fingers and the piano, and the music that seemed to flow from his heart. He remembered all the times he had been denied, all the moments of waiting and practice. Each note he played felt like a reward for the patience and persistence he had shown. He realized that the longing, the observing, the practicing in silence, had all led to this moment. It was more than just playing the piano. It was a confirmation that dedication and passion could create something real and beautiful. As he played, he began to explore more complex combinations of notes, experimenting with chords, rhythm, and dynamics. He discovered that he could make the music louder, softer, faster, slower, and each change added emotion and depth. The hall seemed to respond, the sound bouncing off the walls, filling every corner with melodies that carried a sense of wonder. He felt a joy that he had never experienced before, a joy that came from creating something alive, something that could touch others. Hours passed without him noticing. When he finally stopped to take a breath, he looked up and saw the teacher smiling, a quiet pride in their eyes. They nodded, a silent acknowledgement of how far he had come. The boy felt a rush of gratitude and happiness. He had finally touched the piano, and for the first time, he realized that the music he had imagined for so long could really exist in the world. He practiced more that afternoon, building on what he had learned, experimenting with small variations, and letting his feelings guide him. Each note was a discovery, each melody a step closer to the music he had always dreamed of playing. The old keyboard at home had taught him the basics, but the grand piano now allowed him to express himself fully, to feel the resonance, the depth, and the power of music. By the end of the day, the boy felt exhausted but exhilarated. His fingers were sore, and his mind was buzzing with new ideas and melodies. He realized that this was only the beginning. There was so much more to learn, so many stories to tell through the piano. But he also knew that he had crossed a threshold. The moment he had waited for, dreamed of, and prepared for had arrived. He had touched the piano, and it had responded with music, emotion, and life. As he left the hall, carrying the feeling of the music with him, he felt a sense of pride and excitement. He knew that this was just the start of a journey that would take him deeper into the world of music. The first notes had been played, the first melodies had been born, and he could hardly wait for the next opportunity to sit at the piano and continue creating. That day, the boy had discovered not only the joy of playing but the power of persistence, practice, and belief in oneself. and he knew that the piano would always be a place where his heart could speak, where his fingers could create pure wonder. The boy returned to the music hall the next day with a feeling of excitement he had never experienced before. The grand piano sat there, gleaming under the sunlight, waiting patiently as if it knew he would come. He approached it slowly, taking a moment to feel its presence, to imagine all the melodies that had yet to come from its keys. Today, he wanted to explore more, to go beyond the simple notes he had learned yesterday, to create something richer and more beautiful. He sat down on the bench, adjusted his posture, and placed his fingers gently on the keys. At first, he hesitated, remembering the advice the teacher had given him. To feel the music, to listen to it, and to let it guide his hands. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the quiet of the hall surround him. Then, he pressed the keys, starting with a simple melody, soft and slow. The sound filled the room, gentle and alive, and he felt the music vibrating through him, through the piano, and into the empty space around him. As he continued, something extraordinary happened. The hesitant notes he had played yesterday began to flow smoothly, and he started experimenting with combinations of chords he had never tried before. Each movement of his fingers created a new sound, a new pattern, and he felt a surge of joy. He realized that he could make the piano sing in ways he had only imagined in his dreams. The music became a conversation between him and the instrument, each note responding to his emotions and intent. He began to play with more confidence, adding pauses, varying the tempo, and exploring dynamics. Some notes were soft, almost whispering, while others rang out boldly, echoing across the hall. The boy felt a sense of freedom, as if he could tell a story without words, expressing feelings that had no other outlet. He was no longer just playing notes. He was creating, discovering, and experiencing music in a way that was completely his own. The teacher watched from the side, quietly amazed at what the boy was doing. The small gestures, the way he listened to the sound, and the emotion in each note showed a depth that could not be taught. The music had a life of its own, carried by the boy's hands and heart. It was a blend of technique, emotion, and imagination, something that had grown naturally from his dedication and passion. Time seemed to disappear as he played. The boy lost himself completely in the music, feeling every vibration, every resonance. He experimented with rhythm and harmony, trying different keys, and finding combinations that sounded magical to his ears. The hall, once empty and quiet, now seemed full of energy, alive with the music that radiated from the piano. Even the shadows on the walls seemed to sway with the melodies, as if the room itself was listening and responding. Occasionally, he would pause to adjust his fingers or to think about the next notes. Each pause was deliberate, allowing the music to breathe, to flow naturally. He remembered the teacher's words about the silence between notes and realized that the pauses were just as important as the sounds. They added depth and emotion, allowing the listener to feel the music in a more profound way. He felt proud of his progress and amazed at how much he had learned from simply observing, imagining, and practicing. As the afternoon continued, more people began to pass by the hall. They heard the music and stopped, drawn in by the beauty and emotion it carried. Some leaned against the doorway, listening quietly, unable to believe that such a young boy could create such depth of sound. The boy, focused on the music, did not notice them at first. He was entirely immersed, letting the piano guide his hands and his heart. Each note seemed to tell a story, and each chord carried a feeling that resonated with anyone who listened. He began to play more complex melodies, weaving together different themes and ideas he had imagined during his practice. Some notes were fast and playful, while others were slow and contemplative. He experimented with variations, creating patterns that had never existed before. It was as if the piano was giving him the freedom to explore, to invent, and to express the music that lived inside him. The joy of discovery was overwhelming, and he felt a sense of accomplishment and wonder. The boy also noticed how much he had grown since the first day he had approached the piano. He could feel his fingers moving with more agility, his hands understanding the keys instinctively. He could listen and adjust instantly, hearing mistakes and correcting them in real time. He realized that the hours of practice, observation, and imagination had transformed him. He was no longer the boy who had only watched from the corner. He was a musician in the making, discovering the magic of music through his own efforts. As he continued, the teacher occasionally offered quiet guidance, suggesting small adjustments in posture, finger placement, or timing. The boy welcomed these tips and incorporated them seamlessly, understanding that even small improvements could make a significant difference. He felt a sense of gratitude for the teacher's patience and encouragement, knowing that this guidance, combined with his own determination, had brought him to this moment. The boy's confidence grew with every passing hour. He started to compose short melodies spontaneously, using the piano to tell stories he had never spoken aloud. Each composition reflected his emotions, his thoughts, and his imagination. He could feel the music reaching beyond himself, connecting to the hall, to the listeners, and even to the empty corners that had once seemed so lonely. He realized that music was not just about playing notes. It was about communication, expression, and sharing a piece of one's soul. As the afternoon turned into evening, the boy finally stopped to rest. He sat quietly, hands hovering above the keys, feeling the echoes of the music he had created. The hall was filled with a sense of wonder, and he felt an immense satisfaction. He had discovered the true joy of playing the piano, the ability to create, to express, and to move others without saying a single word. He had touched something deep inside himself and brought it to life through the piano. Walking home that day, the boy felt a sense of pride and excitement. He knew that this was only the beginning of a lifelong journey. There were still countless melodies to discover, stories to tell, and emotions to express. But he also knew that he had found a path, one that would allow him to grow, learn, and share his passion with others. The music was no longer just an idea in his mind. It had become a living, breathing part of his world, a reflection of his heart and soul. The boy thought about the moments when he had been denied, when he had only watched and imagined. Those moments, which had once felt disappointing, now seemed like an essential part of his journey. They had taught him patience, persistence, and the value of preparation. They had allowed him to develop a deep understanding of music, to feel it, and to express it authentically. And now, as he played freely and confidently, he realized that the wait had been worth every second. That evening, as he lay in bed, he replayed the day in his mind. He could still feel the vibration of the keys, the flow of the melodies, and the emotion in each note. He understood that music had become more than just a skill. It had become a part of who he was. It had given him a voice, a way to communicate feelings that words could not capture. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he would continue to explore, to create, and to share this wonder with the world. The boy returned to the music hall every day, carrying with him a sense of purpose and joy that he had never known before. Each visit was a chance to explore, to experiment, and to connect with the piano in new ways. The grand piano, which had once seemed distant and untouchable, had now become a trusted companion, responding to the boy's touch with music that reflected his feelings, imagination, and growth. Over time, the boy's playing improved steadily. What had begun as simple, hesitant melodies gradually transformed into complex compositions filled with emotion and nuance. He learned to play not just the notes but the stories behind them. He experimented with rhythm and tempo, discovering how each variation could convey a different feeling. He played with dynamics, sometimes soft and gentle, sometimes bold and powerful, understanding that music was a language that could express what words often could not. The music hall, once empty and silent, began to fill with listeners. Friends, neighbors, and strangers would stop to hear the boy play, drawn in by the sincerity and beauty of the music. They were amazed at how someone so young, with no formal training, could create such depth and emotion. Some would quietly sit and listen, moved to tears or laughter by the melodies. The boy, focused on his music, sometimes did not notice the audience, but he could feel their presence, their reactions, and it encouraged him to explore even further. As his confidence grew, the boy began to compose his own pieces. Each composition was a reflection of his journey, his feelings, and the experiences he had gathered over months of practice and observation. He combined elements he had learned from watching others with his imagination, creating melodies that were uniquely his own. Some pieces were joyful and playful, others introspective and serene, and some carried a mixture of emotions, like life itself. The teacher continued to guide him gently, offering suggestions and insights that helped the boy refine his technique and expression. The boy welcomed the guidance, but he had also learned to trust his instincts, to listen to the music within himself, and to let it guide his fingers. He realized that music was not just about following rules or patterns. It was about feeling, creating, and connecting. Word of the boy's talent began to spread beyond the hall. Invitations came for him to perform at school events and small local concerts. Each performance was an opportunity to share the music he had nurtured, to inspire others, and to experience the joy of touching people's hearts. He played with sincerity and emotion, knowing that the audience could feel what he was trying to express. And they did. People were captivated by the music, not just for its technical skill but for the feeling, the authenticity, and the story it carried. Despite the growing recognition, the boy remained humble. He remembered the days when he had only watched from the corner, the times when he had been denied the piano, and the long hours of practice at home. Those experiences had taught him patience, resilience, and the value of persistence. They reminded him that every achievement, every melody, was the result of dedication and love for what he was doing. The boy also discovered the joy of inspiring others. Young children who came to the hall would watch him play, wide-eyed, and sometimes they would pick up small instruments themselves, trying to replicate what they had heard. Adults would smile, remembering their own dreams and the music they had once loved. The boy realized that his music had the power not just to express his own feelings but to touch others, to ignite hope, joy, and creativity in those who listened. He continued to explore and experiment with different styles and techniques, always curious and eager to learn. He discovered that music could tell countless stories, evoke endless emotions, and create connections between people who might never meet otherwise. He found that even a simple melody could carry profound meaning if played with feeling and attention. Each day brought new discoveries, new challenges, and new joys. As he matured, the boy understood the deeper lessons the piano had taught him. It was not just about skill or talent. It was about dedication, patience, observation, and the willingness to persevere even when progress seemed slow. It was about listening deeply, both to the music and to the world around him. It was about expressing what could not be said in words and connecting with others through a universal language that transcended age, culture, and experience. Even as he performed in front of audiences, the boy never lost the sense of wonder he had felt the first time he touched the grand piano. He remembered the hesitation, the excitement, the trembling fingers, and the joy of that first note. Those memories became a source of inspiration, reminding him that every journey begins with a single step, a single attempt, and the courage to pursue a dream. The boy's music continued to evolve. He composed longer pieces, experimented with harmonies, and explored complex rhythms. Each composition was a reflection of his growth, not just as a musician but as a person. Through the piano, he learned patience, focus, empathy, and the ability to communicate feelings without words. The instrument became a mirror of his soul, revealing the depths of his emotions and the beauty of his imagination. As time went on, the boy's story became known as one of inspiration. People admired his perseverance, his dedication, and the way he had transformed a simple longing into something extraordinary. His journey reminded others that passion, persistence, and belief in oneself could overcome obstacles and create moments of wonder. The music he played was more than notes. It was proof that dreams, no matter how distant or challenging, could become reality with dedication and love. The boy never forgot the lessons he had learned along the way. He remembered the days of waiting and observing, the times of frustration and doubt, and the long hours of practice on a humble, out-of-tune keyboard. He knew that these experiences had shaped him, made him resilient, and prepared him to touch the grand piano and create music that could move people. The journey had been just as important as the achievement. Every day he continued to play, to learn, and to share his music. Each note was a celebration of persistence, each melody a testament to the power of passion, and each performance an opportunity to inspire others. He had begun as a boy with a dream, standing quietly in the corner, longing to touch the piano. Now, he was a musician whose fingers created wonder, whose heart poured into every melody, and whose music touched the lives of everyone who listened. In the quiet moments, when the hall was empty, the boy would sit at the piano, close his eyes and play for himself. These were the moments when he felt the deepest connection to the instrument, when he could explore freely and express fully. He would experiment with new ideas, compose new melodies, and lose himself in the beauty of creation. It was in these moments that he remembered why he had begun this journey and why he would continue for the rest of his life. The boy had discovered something far greater than music. He had discovered the power of patience, the joy of persistence, and the magic of expressing oneself through art. He had learned that obstacles and refusals were not the end but stepping stones, that passion could overcome doubt, and that love for what one does could create wonder beyond imagination. And through it all, the piano had been his companion, his teacher, and the voice of his heart. The boy's journey was far from over. There were still countless melodies to explore, stories to tell, and emotions to express. But he had learned that the path mattered as much as the destination, that each practice session, each note, each pause, and each experiment contributed to the wonder he could create. And so, with joy, dedication, and an unwavering love for the music, he continued to play, knowing that every time his fingers touched the keys, something magical was born, something that could touch hearts, inspire minds, and create pure wonder.